Welcome to this week's episode of the Good Luck Club podcast. Our mission here is to help 1 million people start a business of their own and make sure anyone that starts a business never feels alone doing it. We believe strongly anyone can be taught to be an entrepreneur. No one's born a doctor, no one's born a lawyer, and no one's born an entrepreneur. If you wanted to become a doctor, then you'd be given training. There's different types of doctors. There's brain surgeons and there's GPs, all with different skills, but they're all called a doctor. It's the same with entrepreneurship. You might not think you're an entrepreneur, but you absolutely are. We know there are people out there right now with ability that can't find a job. And we're saying, let us help you create your own job. You might have been trained to think you're not an entrepreneur. You are. It's just a question of what type of entrepreneur. So today's guest will share his story with you, his insights with you, and hopefully it will inspire you and give you the tools you need to start a business of your own. And of course, if you've already started a business of your own, I know myself as well as my guest knows today how hard it can be to build a business of your own, especially in difficult times. So we're here to share knowledge, inspire and support you. So I hope you enjoy our podcast today. My guest today is entrepreneur Partick Tsang, Chairman of Tsangs Group. Partick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I wonder if we could start off the podcast by you kindly telling my audience a little bit about who you are.
Sure, Simon. So my name is Partick Tsang. I'm the Chairman of the Tsangs Group. We're a family office based out of Hong Kong. We're a China-focused family office investing into early stage ventures, and then we take the companies public. So obviously I make investments, direct investments into private companies, predominantly tech companies. I'm a global investor, global citizen, like yourself. So I live between London and Hong Kong. And we invest, everywhere from the US to Hong Kong to China to the UK to Europe, different places. And I'm very happy to be on the show because, like yourself, I'm also a podcast host. Proud to say it. I have a show called Anything is Possible, which Simon's going to be proudly on season 2. We did season 1 in 2020. Now it's 2021. We had 19 guests. Very happy to have Simon on, inspiring us about entrepreneurship and why he's doing what he's doing. And I agree with all the stuff that he talks about. And it's great to be here to share more knowledge.
Thank you so much, Partick. And guys, if you want to listen to Partick's podcast, the links are below. I suggest you don't listen to this podcast, press pause and go listen to his. I have been consuming his content and enjoying it. Be patient, listen to the whole thing. Absolutely brilliant content, worth listening to. If you want to be an entrepreneur, I know most of my audience do, you'll get a lot from his content. So Partick, thanks for coming on my podcast show after letting me be on yours. Now, can we start off, I wonder, by talking a little bit about how did you end up investing in businesses? How did you end up being interested in entrepreneurship? Was it something in your family that kind of was always there? Or was it something you've self-taught? How has it come about that you're doing what you're doing today?
Okay, so that's a series of very complex questions. I'll try and dissect it one by one. If I forget, you need to remind me. So our family's rich. So I was actually born and raised in Belfast, Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. A lot of people try to disagree with that. My family's originally from Hong Kong. So we're Hong Kong Chinese. We've been in Hong Kong for, I think, 18 generations. So we're from the New Territories. Our family comes from a history of farmers. So we weren't, wealthy or anything by a long way in the old days. And my great-grandfather, who grew up during the colonial times in the UK, he had like a pigtail from the from the Qing dynasty, and he couldn't read or write. And he realized that the power of the pen is more powerful than the power of the sword. So he made sure that even though we weren't wealthy in any means, he made sure that my grandfather, who was the eldest child or the eldest son, he made sure that he at least got some education. So he was educated to around 11, 12. He only had 3-4 years of education. And my grandfather managed to reach out to Kowloon in the outer city in Hong Kong at the time, worked for the Royal Navy at the time, and he had an opportunity to move to the UK. So in 1956, he took a boat from Hong Kong, ended up in Liverpool, and he got here, worked for maybe 5-6 years as a waiter in a Chinese restaurant. And then he saved up enough money, borrowed some money, and started up his new venture, which is a restaurant. And eventually he opened up maybe like 30, 40 restaurants at one time in the northwest of England and became very successful. And then he started to invest into real estate in the UK, Hong Kong, and he started to make the big money in the 90s when China opened up, and he started to invest into real estate in mainland China. So definitely we were not entrepreneurs in terms of DNA, but I think one thing I would like to say is it's the drive of not fearing of the future and trying to make the best out of what you've got, not, giving up and for the sake of the livelihood of your family and your sons and daughters and your relatives to go to somewhere where, no one knows about, not knowing the language, the culture. And he really was the pioneer of the family to break into the UK. And I was obviously raised and born in the UK. My father was sent from Hong Kong to the UK in the 60s, 70s to run the business. And eventually we built up a big, empire of restaurants, and that went extremely well. So I was very lucky to have a good education in the UK. And I started off first as a lawyer, which was not my favorite profession. And I then went on into finance, into investments, which we can, talk a little bit more later. And that's a big turning point. And I think we just evolve as people in terms of what career you do, what business you do. And I just fell in love with, doing deals. Not necessarily, it's not to do with the money, as we all know. Entrepreneurship is the same as sports or music or art. It's something that you need to really love. You're really passionate. You get up, very early. You do your things and you just don't want to sleep. You want to check your phone, your emails, your texts, the phone calls, kind of do a bit more, kind of improve myself, kind of learn from other people. And it's that passion that drives us is what I call entrepreneurship. It's not about, I have to hit, $10 billion, $100 billion. It's not the money, because money never drives what people do well. Passion does. It's the love of what you're doing that makes us great in what you're doing. Did I miss anything?
No, fantastic insight. I was just thinking about my own coat of arms. My family tried to trace their ancestors back by the name Squibb, and we were a bit disappointed because apparently you go back 10 generations in my name and we were thieves and robbers in a village. So I was not as proud of my story as you are. And so it's kind of amazing to have that kind of backstory on your family history. But it must bring a lot of...
So just to interrupt, that's a very good point. I think, in Asian culture, we tend to hold a lot of, we tend to hold a lot of, what's the thing that
prestige.
You keep?
Prestige, isn't
it? Not prestige. Let's say our families go back a long way. We hate each other, right, and we keep that sort of like hatred towards each other. This sort of, what would you call it? The negativity of, your dad killed my dad, my granddad killed your dad. There's all this like revenge thing.
Does right? that exist, right?
Sorry?
There's a lot of that in culture in general, isn't there? Like, I guess the Irish versus the British, or like, the...
Yes, I don't even think it's an Asian thing. I think it's just human nature that we try to be, and all the negative thoughts of us, revenge, anger, all this negative thoughts tends to like creep inside us like a virus, and it doesn't leave. And we get trapped in it, and then things get worse. But what I'm trying to say here is, no matter what your previous person, your father, your grandfather, or whoever in different generations did to other people which were bad, the fact is you didn't do it. And and recognize that maybe there's something that people close to you or related to you by way of blood, and it was bad, then it's people like myself, who I call, a friend, I can't judge you what someone else did. And I shouldn't attach that to you. And I think if people were able to adopt this kind of mentality, the world would be a better place.
It's interesting because I've always, when I was younger, I never realised, for example, that I was different from my family. I just assumed they were my family and we were all the same at our core because we were family. And as we grew up, I realised that we actually had very different moral codes, even though we had the same parents, which I guess goes to show there's some natural instinct in you that perhaps gets cultivated by accident. But I think it's very interesting to look at family history. I always craved a prestigious family history, especially when I would come across people that, you know, would talk about how their father was a lord, or especially in England, that's very, you know, like my father's a lord and my grandfather was Sir, blah, blah, blah. You know, you kind of crave that backstop that proves somehow that you're something, someone interesting. And I came to terms with my own life that, you know, whatever my history was, I could rewrite it now in this time and make my name today with doing the right thing, for example, and treating people with respect and being honest and authentic, right? So I mean, there's something really interesting in what we're talking about here that might be useful to my audience. It doesn't matter what your father did or what your mother did. It really doesn't matter. It matters what you do and how you cultivate your personal brand and personal life, right?
Absolutely. I think one thing that I would like to share with the audience, I mean, today I might go a bit off tangent. It's not just about entrepreneurship. I wanted to just share some stories of myself, hopefully that can give some, you know, if not lessons to other people, maybe some entertainment. So we come from a very traditional, you know, Asian family where generally the patriarch, i.e. my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, the men of the family would tell what to do. And generally speaking, especially when not just my generation, but the generations before it, generally the women would be, you know, second class in terms of their say and opinion, which hopefully we can change this through, you know, the calls for diversity. But the example I wanted to give is that in Asian culture, we tend to, the families, the parents, we'd like to push our children to become, you know, your doctors, your lawyers, you know, don't do sports, don't do art, just focus on studying. And I was just mentioning before that, you know, my first choice of a career was actually a lawyer, because at that time, all the, you know, parents of immigrants would typically, you know, want your kid to be a doctor or a lawyer. So I thought, okay, I'm not sure, I'm not really sure of what to pick or what to study. So I ended up studying law. And half of the reason, or even more than half the reason, was in order to please my parents that, oh, I'm doing law or medicine. I went to do law. I read law. I went on to do law school. I finished law school, and then I went on and became a solicitor in Hong Kong and also in England and Wales. So I trained for 2 years, and the first 2 years of working was fine because everything was new to me. So it was all novel. I enjoyed working. But then once I got to the third, fourth year, I realized that the legal industry was not for me because it was too restrictive. You have to follow these rules. There's no, you know, you don't call the shots. You're actually trying to resolve problems or help people plan of what to do instead of being the person who calls the shots. So that's when I decided that I needed to make a career change and then move into finance. But there's another story in that. But what I wanted to tell you and the audience is that, you know, your parents love you. They want the best for you. But my advice to a lot of people is you should respect your parents for what they've done for you, how they've raised you, gave you their upbringing, sent you to a good school, and whatever love or other things that they've done to you. But ultimately, the life is yours, so you have to make the choice that is best suited for yourself. And sometimes hard decisions could upset and in fact be totally against what your father and your mother wants or other people in your family members.
I really love this point you're making. Actually, I think it's very important for people to pick up on the nuance of it. You know, at the end of the day, there will always be pressure for other people's pressure on you to do things. And I think it is important. I do think probably an entrepreneurial trait, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you need to learn to probably listen to yourself, listen to what matters to you, not be so influenced by anybody, including family history, you know, and actually maybe look at what you're designed to do and what you enjoy to do. And so when you became a lawyer, do you think it was pressure from the family, or that was actually your personal instinct, or do you think it was accidentally you were brainwashed into thinking that was what you should do because you could do it?
It was a combination of different things. It definitely wasn't my game plan. It was because when I went to a good boarding school in the UK, which I wasn't a boarder, I was a day boy, but we had like, you know, these like career classes, and you meet one of the teachers who weren't really careers teacher. It was just like a side gig for them after school. And you basically spent literally 10 minutes with the guy, and he'll say, okay, so Simon, what do you want to do? Right. And when you're a 16-year-old kid or 15-year-old kid and they ask you, you really don't really have an idea. Right. And at that time, there was no internet, mobile phone, you know, the library's not as accessible as it is today. So the knowledge was very was very scarce. And on top of that, my parents and my family, they were not very well connected in the UK or understood English or things like that. So I didn't really have uncles or aunties to like get guidance from. So it was just like basically me and the world. So I basically listened to the careers teacher. None of the stuff what they said made any sense or they cared in any way, right? They just wanted to go home. They're just another 9-to-5 guy, right? But so, and I thought, okay, maybe maybe medicine, maybe law. And I thought, okay, I don't really want to be a doctor. So I ended up just choosing law because it seemed to be a good, profession. So I studied it. And then at uni, I did that for 3 years thinking, okay, it's okay. And I did well. I got a 2-1. I actually only went to the library once during my whole time at university. And that was the day of the induction week in week 1 or day 1 when you get everyone together. That's the first time I went to the library. And the reason for that is I'm a person who solves problems, and I just think exams are a waste of time. And I just do the bare minimum or the quickest or fastest way of getting past the exam, which I did. So I ended up just partying and not doing much work during the first year. And then I wised up a little bit during the second year, third year, got my 2-1. And I think, oh, okay, so what do I do next? So maybe 5% of the friends, the peers, they went off and did other things. And then the other 95% all registered and applied to law school, which I then thought, okay, what am I going to do? So I ended up continuing because I didn't really know what to do. I was just following the path. Ended up doing law school. I finished it. It was done. And I thought, okay, next. And then what's everyone else doing? Everyone's applying to become a lawyer. And so I thought, okay, I'll start working now. So I started to apply. So I didn't, to be honest, when I was younger, I didn't think too much about, oh, I have to be the biggest lawyer. I have to be so successful. I knew that I'm on to do great things, but I really didn't really think too much about, what am I actually going to be doing? I think in life, I just try to do the best that I can. And if I've tried my best, then that's all I can do. And I'm a big believer in this. So the law was just, I guess, sort of kind of an accident, but I did as well as I could when I was doing it. I still got my 2-1. I did well, got a good, law school degree and so on. But it's, but the problem with it is once you've started to have 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps into this like forest of the law, it takes a long time to sort of like walk back the damage that you've done. So luckily, because I changed quite early on in my career to say law is not for me, I'm going to move. And the thing is, one of the entrepreneurial skills, I think traits that I have is that I'm not afraid to own up that I've made a mistake and I try and make things better, right? There's a lot of friends, there's a lot of friends of mine who were, legal friends who studied law and law school with me. They all went on and worked. Yeah, they're now big partners of big firms like in Linklaters, Clifford Chance, all the big firms. But the problem for them is that they're all now very jealous and envious that they're doing something that is paying them very well. They don't find it very passionate and engaging. Whereas I'm doing what I want. I get to meet cool people in different countries, different disruptive business models, things that I want to do that helps change the world and do better and help more people. And they're just like writing documents, right? And they have to be on the clock all the time thinking, oh, how much should I, how should I charge my clients? How many minutes every time I pick up the phone, I'm charging somebody. Whereas I'm thinking, it's okay. I can give you 5 days, 7 days of my life, but I don't charge you anything. That's just, something that's part of the whole, due diligence or brainstorming session. So I'm very grateful that I went through the phase, but I also call myself very fortunate and lucky to be able to have ventured out and left the law for good.
I think I mentioned on your podcast show that I was also, I guess, accidentally manipulated into thinking I should be a lawyer. And so a bit like you at 16, I was 15, you kind of discover who you are, and I didn't become a lawyer, and I'm glad. But it's interesting because I think when you're young anyway, and this might be, this is certainly my cultural experience in England, that being a lawyer was considered a very prestigious thing, and still is, actually, I think. The idea of being a well-paid lawyer, and maybe a TV programs have glamorized it a bit, but standing up and defending someone who's innocent and, the excitement of all that, and then the reality of it. But the point, I think that's very interesting you're talking about, which is useful for my audience to pick up on, is that, you're talking about now understanding this concept of buying time, not selling time. Whereas a lawyer in the end, and I know a few, and I know one who still likes it, but I know one who's totally miserable. And it's miserable because life has got more and more expensive, but his ability to charge an hourly rate that's more and more, it's got harder. So in other words, when he was young, he was earning lots. As he's got older, his capacity to earn has gone down, but his lifestyle costs have gone up. So the pressure on him to work more has gone up. And that's the opposite to an entrepreneur, I think. What we try to do is work very hard at the beginning in the hope that eventually we don't have to work as hard if we don't want to, right? And I think that is the appeal of entrepreneurship, right?
I think something that I'm still struggling with, Simon, and this is something that I think the audience should think about, is as an entrepreneur, the difficulty of being an entrepreneur is to having the balance of life. I still struggle to be able to, work 8 hours, play 8 hours, and then sleep 8 hours. It's usually, working 16 or 20 hours. Yeah. But, I'm not complaining of the long hours because it's something that you enjoy. It's like if you like playing video games or you're in the band, the hours just go by once you keep on playing your guitar or you're playing video games. And I think for entrepreneurs is we don't mind talking to people. We don't mind reading up. We don't mind thinking. We don't mind being on the plane or the train. Or I guess, during COVID, maybe not, but you don't complain of advancing your company or your business or your project or yourself.
But I think it's a really good analogy because I think it gets harder. You can, when you're in your 20s and you're single, playing in a band is fine, and then now we're talking about the downsides of entrepreneurship. It's very interesting that the work-life balance that seems to come up a lot in every conversation I think about entrepreneurship. What is the work-life balance to get there? But the whole concept that you're playing in a band, when you have a partner, you can't go play all night in a band and come back at 3 a.m. and not see them all day. Equally, when you have kids, I've got a 3-year-old, there's no way I could go play in a band all night, right? It's going to be a problem.
Mick Jagger's broken what you're talking about. He's gone on, done what he did since he was 20, and he's still very successful.
Say that again, sorry.
Mick Jagger.
Mick Jagger, well, but maybe, that's a very interesting example as well, taking the analogy to another level.
But it's a very, obviously I'm joking, but that's a bit of an extreme example but the problem with Mick Jagger is he's probably hurt. I don't know Mick myself, sorry Mick for saying this, but I think he's hurt a lot of family members along the way, probably. So you can't win in every part of the way. Something has to give and something has to sacrifice.
Well, I think what you're talking about, maybe the takeaway I want the audience to think about from what you're saying is there's an element of like what makes it justifiable to spend this amount of time working on something. As you develop as an entrepreneur, I think the word purpose comes into play and makes it sustainable. So my son this morning made me almost cry because like, Daddy, can you take me to the zoo today? And I'm like, no, I've got to go interview an entrepreneur who's going to share his amazing knowledge and hopefully will help 10 people today have a better life going forward, but you have to have that purpose to justify that. Hopefully I didn't hurt him. And when he listens to this podcast later, when he's 20 and listens to this podcast, hopefully he'll realize I'm doing it for something bigger than both of us. And so, but that purpose becomes important, doesn't it? And I think that's an element of it.
I think what you should have said, Simon, is son, coronavirus, the zoos are closed right now. So
yeah, I did also say that, but I'm a bit scared to make him scared of coronavirus, and so I'm being a bit cautious. And but I know what you mean. I've tried to approach coronavirus to him, and then the next day he's running away from people, saying, "Oh my God, they've got coronavirus." I'm like, "Don't be scared of people," But I know what you mean. There's always, being a parent, that's a whole different level. I'm learning all the time, and that goes back to ancestors. That no one can ever get it right. You're always going to muck up your children somehow, I'm sure. But back to sometimes you have to be selfish, right? And you have to, like Mick Jagger's probably being selfish. He loves what he does. He loves going on stage. He was criticised a lot for being 65 and running around on the stage like a teenager, but he loves it. So that's what he has to do to stay sane, right?
Absolutely. And I think also, I guess the difficult part of the argument is also he's also providing a lot of entertainment to millions of fans globally. Yeah,
it makes people smile and makes people happy and feel good about themselves. And so, I think it's a really interesting analogy. Do you think that your career is quite common? Do you think, this path that you've taken? I definitely think, that, for example, I've got a friend who was a barrister in Hong Kong, and he was a very successful barrister, and he wanted to quit being a barrister to become a photographer. And he was pulled aside by the Chief Justice there and said, "You could have my job one day. What are you doing? Going to do this photography rubbish?" And there was a lot of pressure for him to stay. day. I mean, do you think that's quite a common problem in society now?
In terms of what, which part? That to change careers even when you're good at something?
Yeah, I guess when you said you weren't going to be a lawyer anymore, I mean, your parents, your
No,
peers.
okay, understand. So I would say this. I think actually this problem is, or this challenge a lot of people face, actually is a very common problem. I think a lot of people in my position probably would not have had the courage to change. People don't like to change that much. People don't like to change or get away from the comfort zone. And I think entrepreneurs have this, I'm not saying that I'm great or whatever, all this kind of stuff. I think entrepreneurs have this trait whereby they're more risk taking. I think they're more, it's not because they're brave or they're more courageous. I think sometimes they don't really think as much about, oh, what happens if I jump off the window? They just jump, right? And I think I had a conversation with a lawyer friend recently, maybe like a month ago in Hong Kong. And he was saying to me that as a lawyer, he was a veteran lawyer. And he was saying he and accountants, he was just saying lawyers and accountants can never be good entrepreneurs because of the training and the way they've been working, the way they've been practiced and working 10-hour days in their field, they become too conservative. By the time you think 10 hours, 10 days, 10 months of how conservative not parking on a double yellow line, the entrepreneur guy has already made $10 million, right? So I think the difference is, if you don't step away and just, it's very easy for you and me just to keep on talking about it. But I think until you've made the step away from being a salaried person to becoming an entrepreneur, that you really have to do certain things, is if you don't make the jump, you don't really see it. I guess it's a little bit like when you're a child, you don't really know what happens when you're 25, or when you become a father, and you don't really know what it feels like to be a father until you actually become the father.
Yeah, so hard to explain it. That's so true. Yeah, and that's part of why, and I know we're aligned on this, it's part of why I want people to experience entrepreneurship. Even if they don't end up being entrepreneurs for life, it is an amazing experience to take something from your mind and make it real. And so it shows you how powerful your mind is. Everything around us is created by a human mind, pretty much.
I'll give you an example, Simon, of something that I always tell my colleagues and my staff, which is, people are so, especially junior people, a lot of the time people are so, they're so engaged about what their title is and what the name card says, right? I guess when you get to a senior position, you sort of don't care as much because you've already got your reputation and so on. To be honest, I don't really care about the title or what university you went to. It's what this person, whether it's male or female, and what they're going to do. And I always say this to people, like if you see, a dog poo in your office and it's in the middle of the floor, and you walk past it, and then somebody says, oh, why didn't you pick it up, right? If I see the dog poo, whether I'm the chairman or the CEO or the accounts manager or the toilet cleaner, if I see it, I'm going to pick it up, right? And then I'll throw it away. I'm not going to say, oh, just because I'm the chairman, I'm not going to do it. It's just the same thing as at home. If you see a mess, something that's blocking the stairways and you can't go upstairs, do you, your wife, your son, or whoever, when they see that, do they say, oh, it's not my job, I'm not going to do it? And I think the thing about entrepreneur, and why am I saying this, is because when you're an entrepreneur, you don't classify yourself with all these titles and what you're doing and what you're not doing. It's whatever the problem or issue or challenge is in front of you, you get rid of it. Whatever title it may be, you might not want to do it, but you might get some of your staff to do it or whatever. But the thing is, you're the entrepreneur. And as the entrepreneur, I think the most important thing is ownership. And it's not the ownership of, the shares or the stocks of the company. It's the ownership of the whole thing. You're like the father, the grandfather, you're the leader of the pack, and you have to get rid of the problems, whether it's the dog poo or whatever it may be. And I think if you adopt this mentality, then that's what I call entrepreneurship.
Yeah. I like it and completely agree. And I think for the audience listening, it's gold. And I always say when I meet a founder, they're not CEO or whatever title, they're Chief Persistence Officer. I mean, that's really what they are. I mean, it's just about pushing through and pulling pulling people with you and pulling clients in and making relationships and pushing through, that's the job title that matters, not any fancy title that anyone wants to give themselves. People are too obsessed with job titles, and I couldn't agree more that it really doesn't matter. But equally, I mean, I think there are a lot of people that aren't necessarily willing to do what it takes. And like you say, they see themselves as above the menial tasks, and actually the menial tasks are actually very important. The little details in any business are often what makes it successful. 0 to 1 of building a business is all about doing all the small things that no one else wants to do. That's why big companies end up buying these companies, because they can't do the 0 to 1, because there's not enough people that are willing to do the little bits and pieces that make a business work and start, right?
Absolutely.
Well, tell us about your kind of your early investment phase. How did you make decisions for people listening that want to raise money, for example? What do you look for in people? What's the investment criteria, and anybody stands out as examples to you?
Okay, great question. So I'll talk about it in two phases. The first phase is when I first started out, in terms of from finance point of view. I actually tried to raise money for some of my companies. And this was maybe 20 years ago, 17 years ago. I mean, I had the idea of two things. I actually had the idea of Facebook or a social media platform in the day, in the early 2000s. But just because I didn't have the technical know-how, I didn't know the right people at the time, I didn't have the money or access to the money. I didn't really know what was going on, but I knew that that's where the direction was going. Anyway, I was a bit ahead of the time. It never materialized. The second one was I really saw that there would be mobile content when the iPhone, that was maybe 2007, 2008. That's when I first ventured into mobile gaming, mobile content. But again, the bandwidth speeds and the phone speeds were just not fast enough to do what we're doing today. And I was a bit too early in that. So it's not just about having the ideas. It's also about being the right time at the right place at the right time. But in terms of what kind of people we invest in right now, is entrepreneurs for me are the most important people on the planet. And I would not classify myself as an entrepreneur. I have an entrepreneurial mind. I have an entrepreneurial spirit, but I'm more of a financier. So I actually finance, I invest into entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are the guys who change the world. They're the ones with crazy ideas and make it happen. A lot of crazy ideas never get to where they get to in terms of commercialization. But in terms of 100 ideas, maybe one becomes Facebook or, Instagram. But entrepreneurs are the guys that change the world, and we as financiers only help them to accelerate or push them along their journey. But there's two things that I look for in entrepreneurs. The first one is ability, which is the ability not just about knowing about tech or science or biotech. It's ability to solve problems, as we discussed earlier, ability to make things happen. And then the second thing, which is even more important than ability, is integrity. It has to be people that you can trust in terms of ability, but more importantly is the integrity. Can I trust this person that he or she will not steal money, that will be able to segregate that this is company's interest and not their own interest, and is the right person to drive that thing forward? And if they don't have that integrity, I have no real interest to talk further. So those are my two main traits that I look for in an entrepreneur.
Really good tips for anyone out there trying to raise money that might think it's about their idea or any of that stuff, even their track record. I think integrity is so important. I translate it into moral code. It's also my number one criteria for getting involved with anyone, be it an investment or a partner or anything. It's so undervalued, and I think people that don't work hard to do the right thing deserve to fail. I think that the only thing you can take with you when you leave this world is your reputation. And so that's what you leave for your children. And back to kind of what we were saying earlier, no matter what we want to say about it, there is a reputational link to whatever your parents did. I've got a good friend whose mother was the second from last person to be hanged in the UK. And it comes up every time you Google his name. So it's interesting. We're kind of looping back to what we were saying earlier, but there is always, I just think integrity for your own self. I want my son, for example, to be proud of his father, and I want him to have a good example to live by. And so, it's important to me that I always do the right thing, but I am shocked how many people don't live this way. And I always assume other people are like this. and they're not. But I agree with you. It's such an important piece, and people don't put it clearly into their decks, right? How do you decide on someone's integrity? How do you find out about that before you invest in them?
Typically, pre-COVID, we have to go and we have to spend time with the people. We now obviously do Zoom calls, video calls, but typically they're not good enough. I need to feel their body language, the way they talk, their eyes. Obviously different cultures have different ways of expressing themselves. So I guess it's also a combination of doing this for the last 20 years. It's helped me to gauge and to know more. And then obviously I'm not expert on all things. There's con men, con women all around the world. But it's, and also asking around, knowing their friends, their contacts, previous people that have done deals with them. And that's just ways of mitigating, but you'll never be 100% sure of who's really trustworthy or not.
Yeah, I think that personal connection. I just hired someone for our organization, and I had to meet them. I think we probably broke some COVID rule, but I had to meet them. I just don't feel that's replaceable. You can't get to know someone, no matter how sincere they sound, over a computer, until, as you say, you test in with your gut on their aura. And people don't listen to that enough. I mean, I've definitely made mistakes. I've hired people that have stolen from me and all sorts of things. And you make mistakes, and I think that's how you learn as well, right? That's how you learn to listen to your gut.
One thing that's quite interesting, Simon, I'd like to share with you. In Hong Kong recently, we tried to hire a few people, and we're actually hiring quite a lot of people. One of the persons was like a digital media assistant. And we hired them. It was on Zoom. I think I was in the UK at the time, so I did the Zoom interviews. So my other colleagues interviewed them as well. They signed a contract, they've done, and they're supposed to report to duty in December. And we couldn't, the person didn't turn up. It was a girl. She was like maybe 30, experienced digital media. And then she didn't show up. We couldn't contact her by phone, by WhatsApp, by anything. And she just disappeared. So she even blocked, the phone numbers of the office calling, are you coming? And she didn't bother to reply saying, I'm not coming, I'm not taking the job offer. And I just find it's so shocking, this kind of behavior. And I'm not sure if this is a generation thing or what it is, but all you could have just said is, if you don't have the guts to call in, you just write in and say, sorry, I found another job, good luck, or take care, or whatever. But they just took so many steps to not answer or get back to us. We've made plans, and then we have to, go again to, hire more people, and it just takes time. It just altered everyone's expectations and plans.
It's interesting. This is one of the things I was going to talk to you a little bit about cultural experience, because you called yourself an international citizen. I do describe myself the same way. I sometimes get confused on where I'm from, because, as you know, I spent 20 years in Hong Kong, and I've spent 20 years in England. I grew up in England, so I consider myself English, but I've experienced the world, so I am confused about where I'm from. But I think there's a really interesting thing I noticed between Hong Kong and England, employment-wise. In Hong Kong, there seems to be a very weak link on reference checks, which I think Hong Kong needs to tighten up on. So, for example, in England, if someone lets you down or does something wrong, the reference check is pretty thorough. You don't hire someone until you've done reference checks. But I don't know, the unemployment rate is so low in Hong Kong. Sometimes it's so hard to find good people. There's almost like, we found someone that can do that, let's hire them. I'm not saying that's what you did, but there's certainly, I did that. And sometimes you don't even get a reference check. And also you're not allowed to say something negative about anyone. So there's kind of this whole, you don't want, and also in culture, I think in Asia more than anywhere else, you don't want to hurt someone. So you don't want to give them a negative reference and hurt their career or their life. But there's a reference check problem there, because if you had a proper reference check system, you'd probably, so she's done that to someone else. That's not, you're not the first time that's happened, right? So it's kind of a waste of everyone's time, including hers, which is bizarre. But I've had that experience you just talked about many times. And I think my English listeners or American listeners might not necessarily understand. And do you think it is the reference check that's the problem? Is there something there?
No, I don't. To be honest, I don't think it is. I think 2 points. The first point is, Simon, that's a business idea there, right? I think there's a problem. So obviously entrepreneurs are guys who solve the problems. And if you solve the problems, then you think about ways how you monetize it. So that's one example. But I think regarding this, no, I don't think so. I think it's a generation thing. I think it's got to a stage where I'm generalizing, hopefully I'm not offending anyone, but like a lot of young people nowadays, when they socialize, when they date, when they talk to people, they have to do it via messaging, right?
It's easier to cut off from people now. It's easy. It's easier just to ignore. Maybe it's easier, isn't it?
Yeah. No, the thing is, like, if you're dating somebody and you want to break up with a girl or vice versa, you no longer have to, like, sit them down and say, "Oh, sorry, but I don't think it's working. See you later," thing, right? Because people don't like to own up and face difficult situations. But now, people used to maybe go on the phone and say that, "Sorry, Simon, I want to break up with you," right? Yeah. Now it's just, I'll just block you on Instagram or Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And they just disappear from your life because people just don't have, the courage just to own up and face up the issues. And it's not a big deal. It's just, I guess maybe we're a bit old fashioned and older to think that, that should be the right thing to do, which is just, "I'm sorry, I messed up, can we move on?" But people just want to, like, hide away and just run away. And that's just the wrong way to approach things.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and like you say, in a problem is a business opportunity. Because my next question for you is going to be, I know you can see the future, and I want my listeners to get to know you through this podcast and hopefully through the links below. But I know your reputation. You've got a fantastic reputation. You're a very hardworking, sincere person who's helped a lot of people out in their businesses. But I was interested because I know you can see the future of what you think, what good future businesses might be. I know a lot of my listeners want to start a business, but ideas don't come to them easily. So any thoughts on what the future might look like? What businesses you're looking at now that you think are really exciting areas? Do you think there's any one particular area you think people should focus on going forward?
Sure. In terms of themes, what we're looking at right now is, a lot of it's tech related. One of our missions of the family office now is we want to invest into projects which have positive influence and positive impact. So we don't touch things like arms, tobacco, illegal drugs like THC, cannabis, marijuana. So we want to try and invest, make money, but on top of that, hopefully we can help society and the planet. So obviously things like clean tech, green finance, blockchain is something we like a lot, AI. And we're just looking at various forms of, like, electric battery cars and tech for motorbikes, things like that. We're very big in sort of like emerging markets. Also, the US has been very hot in terms of the stock market. So those are areas that we like to. But one thing I like to share with you in terms of, like, the early stage newbies in terms of entrepreneurs is that, with a phone nowadays, with an iPhone or Android phone nowadays, with your computer, with the internet, anyone can be an entrepreneur. So that's the beauty of the internet, is that anyone can become an entrepreneur now. However, the downside of all this is that because it's so easy for anyone to pick up the phone, install an app, do a website, the other problem is the entry barrier is actually very low. And in order to succeed, in my opinion, not necessarily as an entrepreneur, but in anything in life, you've got to do three things, right? You've got to be maybe the first to do something, or you've got to be the best at doing something, or three, which is easier, is be different. So be the best, be the first, or be different. And someone like me, I'm usually not the first person to do something. I'm also not the best person to do something. So all I can do personally myself is I do things differently, slightly differently. And you don't have to be the first or the best. If you alter it a little bit, then maybe you have the best business model. Because I remember, like, Facebook, Instagram, Google, all these companies, they were never the first companies. I think Amazon might be one of the first companies. But as you go along, you've also seen that all the big giants in terms of tech, they've all evolved in their history. So Amazon was just selling books. Now it sells everything, but they're actually making the most money from their cloud services. Nokia did phones, they went bust, and they're not doing well. But when they first started, they were actually, I think they were manufacturing rubber boots. So it just shows you that as an entrepreneur, you also have to keep evolving. And it's the skill of seeing what's in front of you and trying to adapt to fit your current business into the new one before you get left behind.
Again, a diamond piece of insight there. You know, I think a lot of people do think they need to create some original idea instead of like evolving existing ideas out there, maybe doing them better or doing them in your own way. It doesn't even have to be better sometimes. Just, you know, something you're passionate about, for example, can beat someone that's not passionate about that subject, but doing it. You know, so it's a really good point. That's another thing I noticed culturally, you know, living in different parts of the world. I noticed in Asia, a lot of the big businesses were, you know, were multi-company businesses. So, for example, you know, I know people that started the lift business, made a lot of money in making lifts, and then they diversified and got into the shipping business, and then they diversified, and that's not how it is in England. In England, they tend to be, you know, focused on one business. You know, they're shipbuilding, and that's what they do. You know, and so it was quite interesting for me to see the Asian culture and the way it diversified. And I wanted to ask you, not only what do you think of those two strategies as far as building a business is concerned? Is it good to do the diverse business, or is it good to focus? And second, do you know, when people ask you where you're from or who you are, do you find yourself struggling to identify where you're from and who you are?
Okay, two great questions, Simon. I'll talk about the identity question. Secondly, I'll talk about the first one first. I always think that diversity is a better way of doing it than to focus. So I would say that in life, in your career as a business, you either have a generalist or a specialist. So that's sort of like the focus point. Myself, I'm a specialist generalist. So I know a lot about different things, but I'm not a specialist in any one of the different things. And I think that broad knowledge helps me to connect different dots. And that's why we invest into new clean tech or blockchain or AI, and we see sort of like the new technology coming. So that's what I would call myself. I think the evolution, as I mentioned earlier, is very important, not just as in business, because if you don't think on your feet and you don't know what's coming and you don't change, then you could be out of a business like Kodak or Nokia, all these guys, and being too arrogant a lot of the times is the downfall of a lot of these companies. Like I think Steve Ballmer said in Microsoft that they thought the iPhone being $600, they can't even tell is the end of Apple kind of thing. And then Nokia also thinking that because they're selling much more phones than the iPhone, they just didn't see this whole thing coming. And this arrogance stopped people like that from moving forward. But I think in Asia and in the West, the biggest difference is in Asia, a lot of the families have made money because they ended up having monopolies. And I think in the West, because of the laws and the antitrust laws that we have in Europe and also especially in the US, it's very difficult for one family or one conglomerate to control one particular segment. But, you know, for example, in Korea, your Samsungs, your Hyundais, they do everything from aeronautical to electronics, to shipping, to real estate. And they control so many different things. And because they have the monopoly over certain industries, what they were able to do is they use money to basically buy away and pressure away all the smaller players. And that's the only way that they were able to do so, in my opinion.
But anyway, I think I could actually talk to you all day. You've got so much knowledge and so many insights. I really enjoy talking to you. I guess I wanted to, I'd love to have you back, and maybe we should do a co-host podcast or two together. Sure. I'd love to have you back. I've got so many questions I haven't had a chance to ask you, but I guess I wanted to ask one final question to cap off today's podcast with you, and that would be, if you went back to your younger self and gave some advice, what would it be?
That's a good question. Before I answer that, let me answer the other question, which I didn't get a chance to talk about, which I can sort of like weave back into this, is the identity issue. So that's a really interesting question about the identity. And still to this day, I haven't been able to figure out the question is, right? Or the answer. And, you know, I come from a long list of Hong Kong Chinese families. So we've been 18 generations in Hong Kong. Before that, we were in Guangdong province, Canton, some of you who don't know the name. And then before Guangdong province, we were in Shandong province. And before that, in Henan province. So we're from the Hakka group of people. So we speak a different dialect to the Cantonese and Mandarin people. But, you know, obviously I know Cantonese and Mandarin as well. But so when I was born and raised in the UK, but at home, we only spoke in Hakka dialect. My parents didn't really speak English well at the time. So when I first went to school, I was 4 years old in Belfast, and everyone is not Chinese. They're all, you know, Irish boys and girls. on the day of school, I was bullied. I was like beaten up by 4 or 5 kids. I was crying and didn't enjoy school. I got into a lot of fights, and they were speaking to me in English. I was speaking to them in Hakka, and it was just in Chinese we call it 雞同鴨講, which means chicken talks to ducks, right? And the interesting thing is, I'm thinking, why am I being beaten up? And essentially, it's just ignorance, and the ignorance is. They don't know who I am, and I don't know who they are, right? So I never really saw, Irish people. It was just, I was just with the family when I was young. It was the first time that I engaged with the English language. And obviously I picked it up very quickly because I was young. But then I would always struggle when I was younger because my father would always say, Hong Kong's great, Hong Kong's this, Hong Kong's that. But I never really knew anything about Hong Kong until I sort of got older, when I used to visit once in a while, every 2 or 3 years, to my grandparents who were in Hong Kong at the time. And I had this like cultural mismatch in the identity, thinking, am I Irish? Am I British? Am I Chinese? Am I Hong Kong? So ethnically, of course, I'm Chinese. But I grew up in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. So when I went, so my dream was always, I have to go back to Hong Kong. And when I say go back, I always say go back, even though I never came from Hong Kong originally, in that sense. So my dream was I had to go to Hong Kong. I had to find out what my roots are, how great it is. But the interesting thing is, as soon as I left university and law school, I went to Hong Kong. I started my job. Then I realized that I actually don't really belong in Hong Kong, because the people in Hong Kong, even though they looked like me, in terms of the skin color, they would judge me and think he's like a banana, right? And the banana means like white in the inside, yellow on the outside, right? So the local Hong Kong guys are thinking, oh, you're another Guilo, another like white guy, right? But you look like a Chinese guy. So they weren't racist in that they were beating me up or verbally abusing me, but again, they treated you differently. They looked at you in a different way. So when I'm in the UK, people are thinking, okay, you're not really British. When I'm in Hong Kong, you're not really from Hong Kong. And then when I go to China, oh, you're from Hong Kong, right? So wherever I went, I wasn't really accepted, right? And that's just the story of my life. But as I got older, as I tried to evolve, and as an investor, entrepreneur, I now turned it around. And now when I'm in UK, I'm the China expert. When I'm in Hong Kong, I'm the guy who speaks really good English, understands US listing rules, structures deals which are global. When I'm in China, I'm now the UK Hong Kong expert. So this is a great case of how I turned a negative situation into a positive one. So always have hope, never, give up, and you can turn things around always.
I think
advice.
Oh,
sorry,
before you tell me the advice of your younger self, I just want to kind of say something about what you've just said there. That I want the audience to pick up on, because I know a lot of my audience may also feel that they're different. Maybe they were bullied, maybe they were teased because they're different. What is true from what was just been said there, and from my own personal experience as well, is that your differences can be your superpowers later. So, when you're younger, you want to fit in, I guess. You don't want to stand out. But later, you'll want to stand out. And whatever makes you different will make you stronger later.
Absolutely. So, I don't have regrets in my life. So I live by my life philosophy, which is learn if it is your first day, and live as if it is your last day. So, if we try our best in whatever we do, I always say this, like, life is like a game of poker. We're dealt a hand of cards. You play to the best ability of what you have in your own hand. You don't compare to anything, what Simon has or the other players have. You can't compare to whose parents that you were born with, which country you were born with. You just have to play the best hand that you've been dealt with. And if you've tried your best, that's all you can do. I guess my advice to myself is I probably should have let go of a lot of the hatred or the negativity that I experienced from the racism and the bullying when I was younger, when it was not my fault, but it was somebody else's fault. But I'm also grateful to some of the people that actually did cause, physical and verbal abuse, that it's actually made me much stronger. And I think without them, I might be a lot more ordinary.
You are far from ordinary, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for you, and I love the way you think and the way you work, and I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast and share your story. I hope to have you back on. As I say, I've got a load of questions that I haven't had time to ask you today. I'd love to have you back on. And I know you're in London at the moment. Thanks to COVID, we can't meet, but I hope when you're back, we can. And I'll come and see you in Hong Kong, and hopefully we can go for a hike around the peak and talk about that beautiful city and catch up again. But thank you today for coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you, Simon. Great work that you're doing. I'm glad to be part of it. I hope we can inspire and help more people. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to email, text, or whatever to Simon or myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast show today. If you found what Partick had to say interesting, then do me a favor, hit the like button so the algorithm knows that if you like it, other people might like it as well. If you feel that some of the content we've discussed here today could be useful to someone out there either starting a business or growing a business, then please do share it. It would mean a lot to us and maybe a lot to the person you share it with. If you want to get to know Partick, know more about what he's doing and the great work that he's achieving, then the links are below. Please go connect to him on LinkedIn, go connect to him in any way that you wish to and ask him questions. He's an incredibly generous person with his time, despite his limited time. And absolutely, if you need anything as far as starting a business is concerned or growing a business, we are the world's only free global entrepreneur program that's here to help you start a business or grow a business. And everything we do is free. Our webinars on how to grow a business, how to start a business are free. We're never going to charge you. Our podcast content and all our insights and all our knowledge and all our connections are all available to you free. We're never going to charge you for this content. We want to thank you today for listening to our podcast. I hope you got something from it. Do feel free to comment, as Partick said. We will answer your questions. Partick and myself will be around to answer any questions you have in the comments later. In addition, if we can do anything to help, please do reach out. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. We know you have thousands of podcasts you could be listening to. We feel incredibly lucky that you listen to ours.